Hello, everybody, and welcome to Good Stuff. Pumped up today. We finally have our first football guest and a great one at that. So looking forward to this, and I know you're going to benefit greatly from the message. Just a reminder to head over to YouTube and subscribe to the channel Good Stuff with Kevin. But without further ado, today's guest is Mike Lombardi. He's a writer at The Athletic, host of the podcast GM Shuffle, a part of the Daily Coach crew, and author of Gridiron Genius. Mike, it's great to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate you having me. It's always good to talk to basketball coaches.
Well, hey, we're gonna come out with a bang right now and talk about the Super Bowls. I know you've been a part of a couple, but we'll talk about the three that you're a part of that you won. The first one, San Francisco, 1985. I remember in Stanford. I remember I was a little kid, and I loved the Niners. Ronald Reagan doing the coin toss. Man, you guys destroyed the Dolphins, 38-16. What was that like for you as you're getting into the NFL?
That was my first year in the NFL, so it was kind of an interesting way to enter. We were 15-1 as an overall team. We were really good. I remember training camp, my first training camp up in Rockland, how hard the team worked, how dedicated the team was. First game of the year was in Detroit. It was a nail-biter against Monty Clark's team, the Lions, and we won it in the final seconds of the game. But it was a team that I thought had really good camaraderie, which I didn't know at the time. I knew nothing. I was a blank tape. And, it worked hard together. And Coach Walsh was really, really pushing the team. We lost one game. We were playing the Steelers, I think, in week 12 of the season. We lost, we're about 2 minutes to go in the game. And we were kicking a tying field goal, which would have made it 17-17. And Ray Wersching made the field goal. And Alan Kennedy, number 66, our backup swing tackle, lined up too far in the backfield. So they moved us back 5 yards, and Wersching missed the kick. And we ended up being 15-1 that year, won the two playoff games rather easily, and then dominated the Super Bowl. And it was the greatness of Don Shula showed up in this game, because this is the first time that Shula tried to go no huddle so we wouldn't substitute. He was trying to freeze us on the field.
Yeah.
This is 84-85 Super Bowl. So the ingenuity between him and other people was fairly remarkable. And it didn't really work out. We were able to substitute and do what we needed to do, but it was the Marino's only appearance in the Super Bowl as well.
Yeah, wow. Now we go to the second one when you're with the Patriots, and man, how many people, when I bring this up, I'll never forget, with the Malcom Butler interception, at the goal line. I've actually, in some of my talks that I give, I mentioned that in terms of preparation and hearing that story. Just talk to me about that and what stands out from all that.
I mean, I'm going to actually get two books out of that game. The first book I wrote, The Gridiron Genius, starts off with Belichick's ability to prepare, to have deliberate action. I mean, as you know from reading my book, Belichick in March of that year told the coaching staff he wanted to put a goal line nickel defense in, which meant he wanted three corners, but he also wanted a goal line front. And we didn't run that defense the entire season. We didn't actually run that defense until that play in the Super Bowl, which is kind of fascinating considering, that we practiced it every Friday. We practiced it the Friday before that game. And Bill was he's very deliberate. I tell people this all the time. If he was in the home building business, he'd build one home a year. It'd be the most magnificent home you'd ever seen, but it would be just one a year. And, his patience, his deliberate decision-making. So the next book is going to focus on seeing the non-obvious. And in this play, which is going to hopefully fuel this book, is as Marshawn Lynch carried the ball to the 1 yard line and he handed it back to the official, the ball got spotted, and Belichick, the clock is running. Before Lynch ran the ball to the 1, the clock was at 1:09. By the time Lynch handed the ball back to the official and they snapped it, it was 24 seconds. The clock just kept running. And everybody in our coaching booth, everybody in the stadium was screaming for Bill to call timeout. And Bill just kept looking across the field as if he was in a daze. I mean, he looked like Magnus Carlsen, who, when he plays chess, he's just focused and doesn't really care. And he didn't call timeout. He called for goal line nickel. And of course, Al Michaels and Chris Collinsworth and everyone else thought the obvious thing to do was to call timeout. But after the game, Bill said the reason he didn't call timeout was he saw confusion on the Seattle sideline. So calling timeout would have benefited Seattle, not the Patriots. And that, seeing the non-obvious, being able to identify that, is what separates great leaders, great coaches, because coaches and leaders are the same thing. What separates them, and how to have a process. And the book will go into detail about how to have a process of when you're looking at something to make a decision about, how you work that process, how you utilize your skill set to see things that perhaps other people don't see. The Navy SEALs do it all the time. It's trained, but you've got to be able to do that. And it's often in business and in coaching, we don't do that.
Wow. Well, Coach, I'm ready to buy that book. When's it coming out?
Yeah, I got to sell it first.
Yeah. Well, you got one person ready to go right now. And hey, the third one, obviously the best comeback ever. The Patriots down 28-3. And I'm a huge Brady guy, so watching that was just unbelievable. Talk to us about that as they come back and win 34-28.
Well, that was a classic example that Bill talks about quite often, as coaches need to really understand this. And it harkens back to when I used to get on the team playing with Al Davis. He would call me over and he would say to me, "Do you know why we won?" in his Brooklyn East accent. And he said, "Do you know why we lost?" And if I gave him a horseshit answer like, "Well, we didn't run the ball," or "we had a pass interference call," he would just start MFing me and kill me. I had to give him a real answer. And what I learned from those conversations, and what Bill does an incredible job with, is his ability to understand who's in control of the game and who's in the lead. And typically those two different things. Sometimes you're in control of the game, but you don't have the lead. Sometimes you have the lead, you're never in control of the game. People make so much fun of Bill O'Brien in the playoff game against the Chiefs when he was up, I think, 24-7 in the second quarter, right? Or 17, whatever it was. He never was in control of the game. He just happened to be in the lead, and Bill does a remarkable job. So as that game was going on, Atlanta never had control of the game. They just had control of the lead. And once we started to get back, then we started to gain more control. And what makes this game almost as fascinating as 49 is going up to the game, most of us were confident that we were going to move the ball rather easily on Atlanta. Most of us were confident that we would get a lead on Atlanta. And so on the Thursday and Friday before the Super Bowl, we had 2 periods for 2-point plays. Because at some point, Belichick was anticipating that he was going to have to increase a 13-point lead to 15, a 12-point lead to 14, a 20-point lead to 22. Somehow he was going to have to do that. So that's how he visualized the game before it was played. And so we practiced it, because visualization of how the game is going to get played is a critical part of what Bill does. And it's why he's so successful. And so we practiced 2 periods. So we had a bunch of 2-point plays. And we never would have thought we needed those 2-point plays to get back into the game. We thought we were going to need to extend. So it worked out perfectly.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you just alluded to, what makes Bill successful. You just talked about Al Davis, Bill Walsh, of course, at San Francisco. You've had the privilege. We talked about George Raveling, the basketball coach you do daily coach with. I mean, you are around some guys that are great at their craft. Is there a common denominator? Is there 1, 2 things that stick out to you? And obviously attribute to your success as well, as to why you guys are so successful?
Well, I think everybody, when you meet Al Davis, you know who he is. He has a true core principles of who he is. When you meet Belichick, you know exactly who he is. It's not fake. It's authentic. And Walsh and Belichick were really, truly about culture, not about anything. They were truly about the score will take care of itself if we have the right culture. Don't worry about the score. Worry about the culture. And people misjudge this all the time. Bill's job when he walks into that building in Foxborough is to not devise new schemes or to come up with new ideas. It's to maintain the culture. He installs it, he maintains it, and he adheres to it. So I think that that's what all of them had. And I think every great coach has that. Every great coach knows he needs culture. He needs somebody who will buy into it and really understand it. And I think that's really a really important quality.
So would it, and it's not that I'm not concerned with how to become successful, but at this point in my life, I feel like I'm really more concerned about how to sustain that success.
Right.
Would you attribute it to that culture, or how are they able to sustain that? I look at the Spurs, I look at the Patriots, with Bill Walsh. I mean, that's remarkable. How are they able to do that and nobody else is?
Well, it's what I call competitive stamina. They have competitive stamina. They don't really ever rest on their laurels. I think if you were to talk to Bill today, you would think he's never won a game.
Mm.
You would think he climbs back down to the mountain, and every year he reclimbs the mountain. That takes a lot and doesn't cut a corner.
Yeah.
Bill loves the process. Walsh loved the process. And to maintain excellence, you have to have competitive stamina. You have to be able to not drink the martini of success. You've got to say, look, I'm back to ground zero. I'm going back to what I believe in. I'm going to do what I believe in, and that's going to be the end of it. And so I think that ultimately is the key. And I think that everybody that Tom Brady, everybody that does that understands that.
And so, Tom Brady, Joe Montana, Jerry Rice, whoever, same thing with these players. Is there something that separates them from the rest, or does that go back to the point that you just made? Do you see anything else different in a player?
Well, I think that, I think all the ingredients we're talking about truly is about mental toughness, right?
Yeah, right.
And I think that all the great players are willing to put the team in front of themselves. I mean, Joe Montana was willing to put the team in front of him. It wasn't really about whether Joe threw for 300 yards or, threw 5 touchdowns. He wanted to win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Brady wants to win. I mean, Brady wanted to win. He wanted to win any way he could. And I think that that's all great players. They put themselves. And what Jeff Van Gundy says, too, it's a great quote by Van Gundy. He says, your best player must set the tone of intolerance for anything that's in the way of winning. And I think that that's really what those guys were able to do.
Yeah, so applicable to whether that's a sports team or organization. What would you say is the number one characteristic that you look for, whether it's an organization you were running or part of, in terms of or player or personnel? Was there one thing that stood out, to you?
I think you have to have a competitive environment. You got to have somebody who embraces. And I think most people really make a mistake, and we certainly did in Cleveland, of understanding what's work habits and competitiveness and how those two don't always go together. For example, you could take a guy that works really hard, but on Sunday doesn't compete, and he fools you. You fall in love with him Monday through Saturday. You're in love with him. And then conversely, you could take a guy who doesn't work very hard but competes on Sunday, and you hate him Monday through Saturday. And you've got to be able to figure that out. And you've got to understand there's a difference between competitiveness and work habits. And if you don't, it's really going to be problematic for you. You can change work habits. You can't change competitiveness. You can't. You're just going to coach yourself to death. You can change competitiveness. You can't change work habits. You can't change competitiveness. Yeah. You can change work. So if you take a guy who's got talent, who's lazy and won't work hard, but is highly competitive, and has pride, you'll change him. If you take a guy who's lazy, doesn't work hard, he's not competitive, you're wasting your time.
How do teams miss on players, really bad in the draft? How do companies miss on when they go through their meticulous process of maybe hiring? Can you explain that process maybe to people, maybe walk them through that? Because that's something I would imagine is very difficult to begin with.
Well, I think there's a lot of variables into that. First of all, I think there's a lot of there's 28 biases that we all have inherently in our body that when we come to judging the players, and usually we always start with a bias. In your sport, Kevin, you might the 5-star guy. You hear 5-star guy, what's your first reaction?
Yeah, right. Like he's the best, right?
Great player, right? Well, that's a bias you just started off with. Mm-hmm. Because now all you want to do is see that he's great. Whereas if I told you that 5-star guy was a 1-star guy, your bias would be he's not a very good player.
Yeah, right.
And so every time we judge talent or we judge somebody comes in, the guy comes in for an interview, he graduated from Harvard. Oh, this guy's got to be really smart, or this girl's really smart. Somebody comes in from Ashland. No, okay. Even though the person from Ashland might be 20 times smarter than the person from Harvard, it just was a different variable. So bias really plays a huge part of what goes into decision making in the draft. And then the biases then become deeper because what happens is the law of triviality comes into a play where we start to overlook things that we think are trivial, and then, or we focus on things that are trivial, that really don't matter, that don't understand really what does the makeup. I think in The Last Dance, who would have been able to put up with with Dennis Rodman?
Dennis Rodman, yeah, right.
But Rodman was highly competitive. He didn't fit in a certain box. You couldn't put him in a certain situation. But the reality of it is he, was highly competitive. And so there was a way to get through that. So I think you've got to really take your bias. Most people's bias was, I don't want to deal with Rodman. He's too off the wall for me. So I think bias is really one of the hardest things. There's 28 forms of it. And a lot of it starts before we even know it. It's ingrained. It's a little bit like, why don't we see the non-obvious? Why was Sherlock Holmes so good at seeing the non-obvious? I know he's a fictional character, but he was based on Joseph Bell, a scientist in the 18th century. But why is he able to figure things out through deductive reasoning and we don't? And I think partly because we have bias, partly because we believe in things that necessarily aren't true. Jimmy Kimmel has an incredible segment he does from time to time. He calls it Lie Witness News. And so what Lie Witness News is about is Jimmy Kimmel sends somebody, one time he sent somebody down to the South by Southwest, which is a huge music festival in Austin, Texas. It's also a podcast. It's a huge event. And they have a bunch of bands playing from all over the world. And so Kimmel sent this guy down there and said, did you happen to see, the Kevin Stoppers band last night? And people literally answered, said, oh yeah, man, they were great. They were tremendous. They were just absolutely tremendous. Next guy, oh, I saw Kevin. That's the best show I've ever seen. Well, guess what? The Kevin Stoppers don't exist. They don't exist. Kimmel makes up the name.
Yeah, right.
But people have this natural instinct to want to be, when asked a question, they want to have an opinion. Okay? And that's what happens to us in drafting, in selection. You'll call somebody on the phone for a recommendation because you think this person might know the person you're talking about. And they have really no idea. But they're going to give you a full report. They're going to give you Lie Witness News. And I think that goes into it.
Yeah, so good. Now, I think your perspective, circling back to culture, is so unique just because you've been involved with different franchises. What are some examples of, I would say, healthy or unhealthy culture in franchises? Not that you're specifically naming, who they are, but, what contributes to those unhealthy cultures then?
The owner.
Yeah.
The owner refuses to allow you to put a culture in. When we were in Cleveland when Bill first got to Cleveland in 91, Modell really didn't want a culture. He wanted the media he wanted everybody to be happy. He wanted to make the media happy. He wanted to make the fans in Northeast Ohio happy. He wanted to, he was raised in Brooklyn. He was always about sell hope, kid. Because that's what the Brooklyn Dodgers did, sell hope, and if the owner doesn't buy into the culture, then it can't work. And I think that's why Bill resigned as the coach of the Jets, because he knew if he were going to be the head coach, he needed the right culture. I think he got it in New England. That proved to be successful. So it's usually the owner. And the owner, when I worked in Cleveland the second time, I would ask Jimmy Haslam, tell me what you want. Tell me what you want this team to be. What do you want to represent the Cleveland? How do you want the Browns to be represented? And you couldn't really get an answer out of them. And because of that, you have a lot of different people pulling in different directions, and you have no culture at all. There's an absence of culture.
So what would be some things that you would suggest to people that are listening that they can do on a daily basis with where they're at? How can they continue to improve that workplace culture? How can they continue to place the culture within their team that they're coaching?
I think the first thing they have to do is recognize what job they're in. Number one, are they in a job that they can make a difference in, or are they a job that they can only grow from? because you're always in two kind of jobs. If you're only in a job you can grow from because you're working for somebody else, you've got to grow. You got to put on your calendar 2 hours a day, work out. Everybody, if you ask anybody you've ever coached with, did they work out today? They tell you, yeah. But if you ask them if they read a book, they I don't have time to read, right? But your mind is more important than your body. And so, that's the problem. And so you have to convince them that you got to understand what job you're in. Then you have to have a growth mindset. If you're in a job you can make a difference, and you have to have a growth mindset. You got to be curious by nature. You've got to be willing to listen to people and hear. I'm not saying you should do everything they tell you to do, but you've got to be able to listen and hear. You've got to take varying ideas, and you have to be able to understand exactly who you are and what you're trying to get accomplished. And I love this story. To me, this explains it in the best way I possibly can. I love writers, and one of my favorite writers of all time is Robert Caro, who's written 5 books in his life. 4 of them are on Lyndon Johnson, one of them on Robert Moses, called The Power Brokers. But before he starts every day, when he gets at his desk to write, he reads a paragraph about what that book is about. So he constantly reminds himself to set the direction of his day along the lines. We need to do that as people too. We should every day. This is who I am. This is the direction I want to take. And here's how I want to live my life. And I think that's how you help impact the culture.
Mike, that really, I'm always curious, and to talk, I guess, with you personally. You just touched base on this a little bit. I'm really more concerned, I guess, now in my life about habits and goals. Like, what are some of your habits or daily routines? Because I think if there's a discipline there, that gives you a chance to lead to success. Are there some things that you're doing every day that are translating?
Yeah. First of all, I had to take a step and say, you know what? I'm not a football guy anymore, right? I still talk about football. I have an hour show on VSiN every day from 12 to 1. So I have to study football. So part of my day is allotted to studying football, and when the season's in full bloom, I really have to study football because I want to watch all the games and study the tape. But now I view myself as a writer. So when I wake up in the morning, I need to journal. I need to work on the writing that I want to do, whether it's for the Daily Coach or whether it's for the book. But I see myself as a writer. And then my afternoons are spent on research, because you can't write without research. You can't write without finding ways to improve your writing. And then I read a lot. I read more than I ever have because I need to become a better writer. I'm not trained as a writer. If my English teacher in this little beach town called Ocean City that I grew up in, if she knew I wrote a book, she would be laughing her ass off, And if anybody at Hofstra that I went to college thought I wrote a book, they'd be laughing their ass off too. So I'm not a natural writer. I'm a better rewriter. So my day is spent with the morning writing, workout writing, the afternoon research writing, reading.
Good. Well, let's talk about that book here. Then I'll finish with I kind of do a rapid fire, a couple questions. But what made you? I know you talked a little bit earlier about the book itself, but what made you want to write that book, Gridiron Genius?
Well, I mean, the one thing I think the one strength that I do have is I'm aware. I have really good awareness, and I knew I was around great people. Walsh, Davis, Belichick. I was around greatness. And for me, anytime you're around greatness, you need to share their story, because too many times the story, when it comes from the one person, people don't think it is, because they think they're trying to promote themselves, when in reality it may be factual. So I felt like I needed to. And then I always had a love affair for writers. And I felt like at some point I did not want to be a 60-year-old man, leave the NFL, which most guys have to do at 60, because you get fired, or they don't value experience in the NFL. They value youth. And so I wanted to have a second career. I didn't want to just go somewhere and retire. So I wanted to write. So that's what I did. And so therefore, I knew I was around this, so I knew I had to write a book about them.
Well, and I would ask you to speak a little bit to those listening, and maybe you don't know about the book. They may think, hey, football guy, gridiron genius, but kind of tell them, I don't know if you had going into an expected audience, but what that audience has turned into, or who the book is applicable to, because I think it covers a lot of people.
Well, I mean, ideally, I wrote the book for the women's field hockey coach in high school. That's who I wrote the book for, because the book's really a football book disguised as culture. I mean, that's really, I wanted women's field hockey, women's tennis. I wanted people that don't think of themselves as an NFL coach. I wanted them to love the book. I wanted it to be a Malcolm Gladwell style of book about
Yeah.
culture using football as a backdrop, because I think Malcolm tells great stories. I think Michael Lewis tells great stories. And that's really what my goal and my motivation was for the book. So I hate the cover. We should have changed the cover. The paperback cover is much better. That's kind of reflective of what the book really is. It's a culture book. It's a leadership book disguised as a football book.
Well, good. Well, hey, we're going to, like I said, somewhat of a rapid fire. You got to take a little bit longer. I call this 3-pointer. So I'm going to dish it off to you and let you shoot a couple shots here to finish. Number one, if people were to take maybe, if they were to learn one thing from this talk and take away from this, what would you want that one takeaway to be and just hold on to?
Always have a growth mindset. Always believe what Branch Rickey said at age 77 when he got fired as the general manager of the Pittsburgh Pirates. And they asked him at his farewell press conference, they said, "Mr. Rickey, what's your greatest achievement?" And Branch Rickey, who discovered moved the Brooklyn Dodgers to Los Angeles, won World Series, broke the color barrier with Jackie Robinson, developed a farm system. He said it hasn't happened yet. And I think that that's ultimately what we all are. It hasn't happened yet. And if you read MacArthur's Creed of Youth, you realize that youth is just a state of mind. It's not anything but that. And so to me, I think that's really important, to not lose your growth mindset.
Yeah, so good. Number two, if you could have stepped into my shoes and asked yourself the questions, what's one question that you would have asked that I did not today?
Ask me?
Yeah, that's right.
Oh boy. I think your routine question, because I'm a huge routine guy. I think probably the question I would ask is, what was your biggest mistake? Because I think the only way you really truly can identify with people is to admit their biggest mistakes. And I talked a lot about my biggest mistake because I was early in my career. I didn't understand when I was in a job that I could only grow from. I was trying to make a difference. And I think that I hurt myself in my career by that. But I think you should always ask people what their biggest mistake is and then hear their answer. Listen to it. See if it's humble. See if it's genuine. Because the greatest things we've ever done in life is our mistakes.
Yeah, that's good. We have talked before, so shouldn't have left that one out. But finally, good stuff's the name of this. Just kind of something I say and just something I feel people need. What's something in closing, whether it's just due to the time we're in right now or the things that are going on, that you could leave us with? That's some good stuff.
I think I would urge everybody to go Google Bobby Kennedy's Day of Affirmation speech. It's called The Ripple of Hope. And Bobby Kennedy is addressing a group in South Africa, 1966. It's the most incredible speech you're going to listen to. It's 33 minutes long, but there is a ripple of hope. And he talks about the problems that we faced then. It's the same ones we face today. We've made no progress, but I think we have to have a ripple of hope. We have to band together and shine that light on the problem and solve the problem. We're too great of a nation to have this divisiveness within. And, and my point is it's not going to occur through Twitter. It's not going to occur through Instagram. It's going to occur through all of us working together.
Yeah, that's great. Hey, give us some ideas of just people, how can they stay connected to you, social media, websites, all that other, the newsletter, everything?
I'm on Twitter less and less because it's so depressing. M Lombardi NFL is my Twitter. That's my Instagram as well. The Daily Coach, the Daily_Coach is where we write an email every day. You subscribe to it. We try to, we felt like everybody needs a coach, and we try to be that coach for you every single day. And then my podcast, the GM Shuffle, which is on anywhere where you get your platforms, wherever you get your podcast. It comes out every Wednesday around noon. VSiN, I'm on from 12 to 1 every day during the week, Sirius 204 radio. And then I write for The Athletic at least once a week now.
Okay. Well, Mike, I greatly appreciate you just taking the time, sharing with us some stories, experiences, and just your wealth of knowledge is just beyond impressive. So thank you very much for impacting some people here today.
Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, and great message here today from Mike. I look forward to hearing from everybody how this has become applicable in your life and whatever that role may be. And good luck with that. Until next time, good stuff.